Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And welcome back to Go Astros. I'm James Christopher. Brian and Andy will be along shortly. I have gone through Chick-fil-A. I have made my most latest tribute to Joe Boo in the hopes that the bats will wake up. We had to go in there for a little bit, 27 runs in 2 games, and here we are. Now, I've been tweeting out a lot over the last 10 games that, at least Oakland lost. And I think it's been treated with a certain degree of maybe they think I'm being sarcastic, but there are really, I think, 2 kinds of Astros fans. There are Astros fans who basically became a fan of the team in 2017. They are young. They have, very little familiarity what it's like for the team to really struggle. And then I think there are Astros fans who became a fan of the team because that they're from Houston or they're from the area and they kind of fell in love with the guys, and then sometimes the winning and the losing thing didn't factor in. I was raised one, didn't really know that my team wasn't the best team in baseball until 1986 when we didn't go. I just didn't know. And so for me, I have always treated winning the division as the goal, and anything that happens after that, is gravy. And so, we've got 36, 37 games left. Of course, Oakland losing or the Astros winning, those are good things. And if it ever happens on the same day, that's a great thing. I don't think that Oakland's going to catch the Astros. And we're going to talk a lot about this month of August, but if you go back to even some of the World Series years, there were always months or stretches of times where the team didn't play well. And I think this is not the best team of the 4 that we've had in this run, right? I don't think it's nearly as good as 17 or 19. It's not as good as 18. There are more holes than what we've seen. And, it's going to really come down to who's playing hot. The Yankees are incredibly hot right now, and teams like the Astros and the White Sox are not. So it's going to come down to who gets hot at the right time, and I think the Astros have the ability to get as hot as anybody when that offense gets going. So, yeah, I'm not going to be upset or I'm going to definitely find solace when Oakland loses, especially when the Astros play a game that maybe they should have won. And last night's game maybe wasn't that. Last night's game, to me, felt like a team a little disengaged, maybe a little less focused as they should have been. The game against the Angels could have gone either way, and they had an inside strike call against Correa. It's one pitch, but it's one pitch that changes at bat because instead of it being strike 3, it's 2-2, and now both Correa and the pitcher have to defend a little bit. So I'm not willing to give up the GOAT. I think that there's still going to be a lot of really good times. I still think this is a team that ends up at about 95 wins, and I think that wins the division and gets you a number 2 or 3 seed going into the playoffs. So, again, lots more to come. Here's Brian, and here's Andy. So we're jumping on with Andy Tom Chesson, as always, first out of the gate on Go Astros. And, it's funny, when we last recorded an episode, it was 8 games ago. And I believe the Astros have only won, by my count, 3 games in that span.
Yeah, it's. I'd like to do this at least one point where we aren't talking about a losing streak or in the middle of a losing streak or dealing with severe disappointment and the fact that I turned off the game after the 5th inning because reruns of Psych seem like a better mental place for me to be than watching just the complete lack of effort and lack of energy. And I think there's a number of factors that go into that, but it's disconcerting because you can, from my perspective, you can very much tell this is a team that gets up for certain other teams and a team that plays down to a lot of other teams. And we're in a stretch of playing a lot of really bad teams. And unfortunately, this is what we're getting. To your point, I think they're 3-5 in the last 8 games.
I think it was it Denny Green who said you are what your record says you are?
Oh, absolutely.
And look, here's the thing. I would never say that this team is mentally weak. I do think that there is a certain degree of mental issue, though, to your point, where you only get up for the games that matter, because that strategy is not one that works all the time. And we acknowledge that the Astros have always had months and weeks, but for it to be as erratic as it was, to paste the Mariners for 27 runs and then not do anything against Kansas City before or after seems like a long-term problem that's going to rear its head.
Well, I think beyond that, it's you've got a franchise or a team this year, franchise probably the wrong word, but team this year as constructed that has played 500 balls since the All-Star break. They're 18-16, and that's including this last couple of weeks that has just absolutely sucked. It's buoyed a little bit by the fact that the team had a really good July. They went 16-8, but in August so far they're 9-11. I think there's a number of factors there. Health is certainly for first and foremost to most. Alex Bregman has been out since June 17th. And okay, great. Alex Bregman's important for a number of reasons. Team is 34-24 without him. But Alex Bregman and Kyle Tucker and Yuli Gurriel missing significant amounts of time puts a strain on a lot of different areas to the point that you're playing Taylor Jones in left field in a major league game, which should not happen.
Although he's thrown two guys out at the plate.
Sure, and that's great, but he shouldn't be out there. We shouldn't be forced to play Jake Myers and Chad McCormick in the same game at the same time unless you're talking about defensive replacements in a late inning game. And even that didn't work on Sunday. Astros are 4-6 since Kyle Tucker went on the IL with his COVID protocol issues. The Astros were 5-4 while Yuli was out. So they've been playing 500 ball, missing three of their heaviest hitters. One of which is back. Yuli's back, and he started to hit in the last couple of games, so that's good because for the first 4 or 5 games, he was just lost at the plate, dropped like 10 points on his batting average. Bregman needs to come back because we have a severe lack of infield depth, whether it's real or perceived, because, you know, as we've talked about, there are players in AAA that we feel probably should have gotten a chance over guys like Jack Wilson. Nothing against Jack Wilson, but prior to being injured, why wasn't Alex Togodi given a look? And I know he's on the 60-day DL, which we both.
Well, he played yesterday, so he must be off it. He played yesterday.
Well, and that was a roster. The 60-day DL was a roster move part. You needed to have him so you didn't have to clear a space on the 40 for somebody. And I don't track that. I'm sure our partner, Breathing Orange Fire, will be able to tell us all about how we're wrong on that too.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger issue beyond health is that last year, and this is just completely my opinion, last year this team learned that they can turn it on when they need to. And you saw that when they realized they had secured a playoff spot and didn't tank, but proceeded to give less than their best efforts to the last couple of weeks of the regular season and that 60-game portion of the Major League Baseball season. And then immediately got in the playoffs, and everything they weren't doing, all of a sudden did do. Taking the extra base, taking pitches, going deep into counts, being the team that got to the point of having, you know, one of the top 5 records in baseball. This year, I'm seeing some of the same behaviors. And what the problem is there's still 38 games, 39 games left in the season. The A's are only 3.5 games back, and only because they've run into a little bit of trouble with their bullpen. Because realistically, based on who they've played and based on who we've played, we should be 6.5 games up right now.
Yeah.
3.5. And only by the grace of God are we not 1.5 right now. Because the A's are a solid team. So it's a matter of, I think, developing a sense of urgency. And as much as I don't believe that Dusty Baker is, you know, a great manager, I also don't think he's the person who is responsible for all the ills in society, like Twitter seems to claim after every loss. He's the one, from the leadership standpoint of his team, that has to create that sense of urgency, especially when he sees that Correa or Altuve or somebody else isn't doing that. So it's concerning from that standpoint. And then you look at the remaining schedule, you've got 2 more against the Royals. You're playing 3 in Arlington against a crappy Rangers team. Who knows what we're going to get there. I expect we'll do well in Seattle because we seem to take them seriously. Maybe we're going to take San Diego seriously, but then you've got a healthy diet of Angels, Rangers, D-backs. until you get to the A's and the Rays at the end of the season. I honestly don't know that schedule. If you said for anybody else that schedule looks good, I don't know that looks good for the Astros as they're constructed in 2021.
On paper, the division should be over before the Astros run into the A's in Oakland in that second to last series of, because again, even mentioning San Diego, I mean they are a disaster right now.
They are, but who knows are we going to pretend they're the team that was as good as they were when they came in the Minute Maid and took 2 of 3? Well, I hope so, because then we're going to get up for them. Or is Tatis going to try to put that team on his back and make a giant run at that point? Because that'll be kind of a last ditch trying to get to a wild card, maybe. I'm honestly less worried about that series in a couple weeks than I am about these next 2 against the stinking Royals. And then I think we still have 7 games against the Rangers, and the Rangers are horrible. The Rangers may be the worst team in baseball right now.
And they've already swept us once.
Exactly.
They already swept us once.
So it's just super frustrating. The good news is that we're going to get Bregman back, it looks like, probably before we go to Arlington. That would be my guess. Nothing official has been said. We're going to get Tucker back, which solidifies our outfield a little bit more.
Dusty's supposed to decide today whether or not, well, not Dusty, but I guess it's supposed to be decided today that whether or not Tucker will need a rehab start. Part of me suspects he will, so that way you can time everything with the rosters expanding in September with Urquidy as well.
Yeah, and I think the other good piece of news is that Urquidy is going to come back, and they seem to be trying to get him back to, I think Dusty even made this point yesterday in his press conference, they need a couple of guys who can go 6 and 7 innings. And outside of the 2 injury starts that Urquidy had, he averages 6 innings a start, which takes some pressure off when you've got, why we're still starting Odorizzi, I have no idea. But, while you're starting him, you can't count on him for more than 5, and you really can't count on him for 4. And then you've got Garcia, who they are very actively limiting his pitches right now. Regardless of results, he's not going to throw more than 90 in a game for a while, maybe the rest of the season, just depending on how some things fall. So there's good news is that help is on the way, and I think that's going to help get us out of the slump. And I think just the calendar being what it is going to improve things. But the Astros really can't afford to drop these next 2 to the Royals. And I think it was more concerning last night. If you look at the series against the Royals in Kansas City last week, they were regrettable games, but I think all told, we lost those games. All three of the games we lost by 4 total runs.
Yeah, and you might have made the argument that had those been home games and the way the at-bats fell, you might have won those games.
Yeah.
Or last night's was sloppy and lazy. There's no other way around it.
If you had a healthy Gurriel, or any of the things that should be going on right now are going on. What's more concerning last night is that you had a good first 2 games against the Mariners. The bullpen blew a game on Sunday, and it looked for all the world like just a giant hangover from last night. And they've got to take this team seriously for the next 2 nights, and they really have to go into Dallas or Arlington or Irving or
wherever they are,
or wherever the hell that hangar is.
Las Colinas. They're hanging the new drywall at McDonald's up there, Las Colinas.
Exactly. I did that job. And they've got to dominate a Rangers team that doesn't have Joey Gallo and doesn't have the rat face Odor anymore. They've got to win, 2 of 3, if not 3 of 3 of those games going into Seattle.
Yeah, I think you have to win 3 of 3 of them, really and truly. And I think, I think one of the things I'm hoping anyway is that we're used to the Astros having a rough August. I wonder if it's just because usually they have a rough August with a 10-game lead in the division. It seems like they think the lead's bigger right now than it is.
Yeah, I think that's one of the Astros fans would get frustrated. And I know a lot of people on Twitter have been calling back to 2017 where we got swept by the White Sox, I think, who were a really bad team in 2017 and got lost 3 of 4 or 4-4 to the A's when the A's were, barely a 3rd place or 4th place team. But those are regrettable. I don't think Hinch was trying to lose games, but he certainly wasn't doing everything he could to win games at that point. He was trying to rest people for September and then October because he knew he had something special on his hands. And so if pitching could carry you to win games, great. If the offense was going to get guys were going to get days off, that's great. But Hinch also had the common sense to say, oh, hold on. My starting right fielder and my starting third baseman are out, and I need Michael Brantley to be able to play. So let me see what I can do. Oh, it wasn't Michael Brantley at that point, but whoever it happened to be. I need Carlos Beltran to be able to play today. He's got a DH at least so I can get somebody rest. But there has to be a piece for piece. Right now, our piece for piece is sitting Brantley and playing Taylor Jones, which nothing against Taylor Jones, who's much better since his second call-up. I think he's got 11 or 12 RBI since he's been brought back up. And Jake Myers has been a revelation. Who knows how long that's going to last because, eventually the league will form a book on him. But he looks solid. And at the very least, he knows how to play outfield defense. It's amazing to have somebody run to a spot and then catch a ball. I don't think we had that this year in center field. But you've got to your rest patterns have to be real, but they also have to make sense based on what your needs are. And right now, the Astros need to win games. They need to get more of a cushion between them and the A's. They do not need to go into Oakland the last series of the season being up 2.5 games.
No, I completely agree. And I really question, I'm actually going to ask Brian about this later on in his segment too. And I'll ask you, I don't understand. Look, for as much as I'm not a fan of Dusty Baker and I wasn't a fan of the hire at the beginning, I don't think all the Astros problems are his, but I do question things like when you have a short bench, starting Alvarez in left field, knowing you're going to have a defensive replacement for him, and then switching him out, and then game gets tied, and now in that DH spot is not, or in that left field, not Alvarez. I don't understand how you don't start Taylor Jones in left field that game and leave Alvarez in DH so you don't lose his bat.
Yeah, I mean, I hate playing second guess the manager. I mean, it's fun to do during the games, but the reality is there's just a lot of decisions that go into the things that Dusty Baker's seeing. My concern is I don't think what Dusty Baker sees is always the reality of what's going on in the field. And so I think he misses things that we might consider obvious, or he misses things that make sense in 2021 that wouldn't have made sense in 1978 in the National League. And that becomes the disconnect. And I think it was always hugely overblown that if you're an American League manager, all you have to do is roll the ball out.
Yeah.
Because there's no decisions to be made. I think you actually have to think, I hate to use the 3D chess thing, but I think you have to think 2-3 steps ahead. And something like today's a day that we might not score 15 runs. So let's have Alvarez's bat, but let's not have him in left field, because if I do have anything, I've got some outfielders I can play. Even if it's Brantley's day off, or even whatever the situation is, put Taylor Jones out there, put Diaz out there, play Yuli at third again. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but you've got some flexibility there. The one place you don't have flexibility is losing Yordan Alvarez's bat.
Right.
Middle of this lineup.
And against a pitcher that already dominated you once and dominated you again, and you thought it was going to be fixed because we've seen him once. That was literally what his thought process was.
Well, I thought that last night about Lynch. Goes to prove what I know about the Royals and Lynch. But yeah, I think there's just inconsistencies, and there are inconsistencies that lead me to believe that he's seeing something the rest of us aren't seeing. And again, he's got decades and decades of experience, but I just wonder sometimes if he's either underthinking or overthinking himself, and I don't even know which way to go with that. But, it was regrettable on Sunday. Bregman gave up a run, and Presley blew a save and gave up, I think, his 4th home run in the entire year. So your bullpen is going to falter sometimes.
Right.
How the extra innings were handled were a little bit different. And the fact that Chas McCormick was up at all instead of Yordan Alvarez didn't look great. Now, you throw horrible home plate umpiring into that, and it makes it all that worse. But you've got to expect you're going to get horrible home plate umpire.
Well, I'll tell you this. The AL West, 6 weeks ago looked like maybe the best division in baseball. Now its top 2 teams are floundering, but I would rather be us than the A's because the A's are not getting production out of their regular lineup. They've blown 3 saves in a row. Their closer is borderline unreliable now. At least we can look as Astros fans and say the cavalry is on its way, and when it gets here, it's a much different team.
Yeah, I mean I'm not down on the Astros at all. It's a crappy month, and August is historically a crappy month. But all told, we're 2 games under 500 with I think 10 left to play or 8 left to play. So, I mean, it's not a horrible place, and you still turn around this record. I just want to see us have some urgency about not just getting to the playoffs, but putting some space between us and the A's so we can comfortably rest people and get to a rotation, get ready for the playoffs versus having to kill ourselves the last couple of weeks.
Well,
when the schedule turns to the A's and the Rays.
Well, and that's my other point too. We also don't want to lose too much ground to the Rays. We want to make sure that series matters because I think getting that first seed and having to play a wild card team, like let's say it's the Yankees, well, they burn coal. And so now you're playing a much more human Yankee team versus if you're playing the White Sox and they get everybody back. That's not a great matchup for the Astros if Rondon is back or Rodon or whatever he is, whatever Godzilla villain he is. Mothra.
Big giant moth. Yeah, you've got to be thinking about playoff seeding at this point. And I think, the Astros feel like they're comfortable at number 2. I'd rather not see the White Sox. If there's anybody of a potential matchup sitting out there, the White Sox are the ones I don't want to play. I want somebody else to have to deal with them because like the Astros, they have the ability to get scorching hot really quick offensively, and their pitching's better than ours.
Yeah,
and that's not a great combination. Maybe our bullpen's a little bit better now with the acquisitions we've made. It's certainly an improvement from where we were, but we did beat them in the season series, and we both had health issues. So I don't want to hear, well, Eloy was out, so that doesn't count. Well, Bregman was out too, so pick one. But you've got to start taking care of business against every team you play, not just the ones you think are important. Like I said, I fully expect us to take 2 or 3 against Seattle a week from now. I'm really worried about what happens today, tomorrow, and then this weekend against the Royals and the Rangers.
Well, we'll find out what happens against both the Royals and the Rangers next week when we're back. Andy, thanks for jumping on.
No problem. Have a great rest of your day, and go Stros.
So we're jumping back on Go Astros. Brian Arbor, the brains of the operation, is back with us. Now, Brian, when we last spoke, it was right after the Angels series. We expected to increase the lead, and I guess we did by a game.
That's the glass half full perspective. That's the optimist take. Whatever as angry and annoyed as we are as Astros fans, it's only more so for the A's, who've now blown 3 straight leads. Maybe Lou Trevino, A's closer, is going to get MVP votes, and the Astros MVP voted later this season.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it has been 3 blown leads. The Mariners scoring 3 last night to win, when traditionally the strength of the Oakland Athletics team has been that bullpen.
Yeah, and so the A's are now out of the playoffs, and so they'll be. That puts more pressure on them to win in the division. It also shows that the Astros have had an opportunity. They played tons of close games last night, notwithstanding. They played tons of close games against the Royals and a close game on Sunday against the Mariners, all of which, had they gotten a few more breaks to go their way, 1 or 2 plays, would really have stretched out the division lead to 5-6 games possibly. So that's the pessimistic take, right? Is they're losing these close games. They played a really bad game last night. My broad get past 162 is 1 over 162 perspective is that happens every once in a while. But it is the more pessimistic case. It's a big missed opportunity for the Astros to really take control of the division race.
Yeah. Yesterday was interesting because they threw the ball all over the yard. I mean, it was a disaster. I want to talk about the Angels game on Sunday, though, and it's impossible for a baseball game to really say a game comes down to one moment, one play or whatever. But that missed third strike call on Correa really does change everything, because a 2-2 count is way different than being struck out. And I really do believe he puts the ball in play there. How do you recover from something like that and have the guys keep moving?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've talked about this a lot here. This is a veteran team with a veteran manager who had bad things happen to him before, and they're pretty even keel. I know people have called, what? Why didn't Dusty go get ejected? Why didn't he sort of that? Well, Correa didn't argue much on that in large part because they were out of players, and Correa knew he needed to stay in the game. So whatever Correa was internally feeling, he took that very professionally. It wasn't even just like yelling on his way to the bench while moving away from the umpire, even that. And I think Dusty may have taken his cue from Correa, because the guy sitting on the bench doesn't have a good view on whether that pitch is actually on the corner or 4 inches inside, as it happened to be. As I get further away, I was as outraged as anybody else watching that. As I get further away, look, there were tons of turning points in that game, which all the Astros had to do was drive in one runner from third base, including the 2 batters after Correa, and win the game. As I get further and further away from that moment, it was a terrible call by Brian Gorman, but they had tons of opportunities in that game to win. They had tons of opportunities in that game to drive in just one more run. And of course, they had their 2 best relievers, their most reliable relievers in the 8th and 9th inning, who didn't get the job done. Now, if they're up by 1 tonight, do I want to see Graven in the 8th and Presley in the 9th? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Trust those guys again. And there's the second blown save this season by Presley.
Just the second one. And the first
yeah.
one, of course, the famous dropped foul ball, turned home run.
Yes. And so, I mean, we can, and it was just part of what was disappointing for me to lose yesterday in particular is I don't expect, this is a team that I don't think carries much hope. Remember, they were down 3-0 in the ALCS last year.
Yeah.
Came back and won 3 straight games when they could have just easily folded up the tent and gone into the offseason. But this isn't a team that's ever going to panic, that's ever going to sort of like get into its, they're not going to get into their feels. They're a veteran team that's been in worse situations before. I expect them to play well over the next 2 games.
I am not a big question the manager guy, particularly with bullpen choices, unless that choice is Brooks Raley. But I do have an issue with some of us. At times I think Dusty gets too cute, and we've seen this come up a couple of times where he's played Alvarez in the field only to defensively replace him, only to then have his spot in the lineup come back up. Don't you think with the short bench, if playing Alvarez is basically committing to playing 2 different spots, that Alvarez just needs to DH and let Taylor Jones play left field?
Yeah. My short answer to that is yes. On the other hand, I'm not sure Taylor Jones is a much better left fielder. He's a natural first baseman. So they may have done the same thing in the 9th inning on Sunday, where they put McCormick in the game, and McCormick is, look, if McCormick can't hit today, they need to put him on the IL and bring someone else up who can play the outfield. They may be short on the 40-man on someone who can play outfield. That may be one of the things that's influencing their decisions. They played again Brantley and Wright each of the last 3 games, which is not the ideal. He's played only a handful of games in right field throughout his career. So they're very stretched with McCormick being unable to hit. I'll need to make a decision on that today.
Yeah, and I see your point about Taylor Jones, but I'd much rather miss Taylor Jones's bat in the lineup than Yordan Alvarez, particularly.
Agree.
Extra inning.
Agree. Particularly if the alternative is right now Jacob Wilson, who is the ultimate replacement player.
God love him though. That boy hustled around. That triple, that was the best moment of his life.
He is, he is somehow a Tyler White who plays shortstop. So.
Yeah, and we miss the great white shark down here. So Urquidy, I think is coming back. It sounds like he will be back in September, so that way they can sort of just take those 2 extra spots. Are you in favor of 6-man rotation for September?
I'm still debating it in my head. I mean, so one is we're still a couple weeks away. I guess we're a week away from September 1st. So, anything can happen. And we've had this six-man debate before, six-man rotation debate before, and it lasted all of not even 2 turns through the rotation. So having 6 healthy starters is an absolute luxury for a baseball team. And so, fingers crossed that we get there. It's very clear they're trying to, the big concern with the 6-man rotation is not Jose Urquidy or Jake Odorizzi, who's clearly their 6th best pitcher, but Luis Garcia. They're very much trying to limit his innings. He's not getting into the 6th inning at all. I think he threw only 70 pitches in a start over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And that is all. Look, they have a very important reason to do that. He's going to pitch important innings for them in October in an American League division and an American League Championship Series. So I think it's more likely they skip a Garcia start or transition him to a long man in the bullpen if they think he's a guy who, when they get to October, is going to be someone who pitches the 3rd time through the order in game 2 or game 3 of the series.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess then keeping in the pitching staff, looking at Odorizzi looked pretty good on the last start. Is it the competition, or do you think it's are we starting to see, are there signs you're seeing that tells you maybe he's starting to come around?
So I took a deep dive on this in my blog looking at Jake Odorizzi. He's pretty good the first time through the order. He's average the second time through the order. I think it's like a 760 OPS, which is slightly above league average, but not, not horrible. And then opposing hitters are peak Barry Bonds against him the 3rd time through the order. It is, he's like 132% worse than the average pitcher the 3rd time through the order. So some of it is just, send him out there for 18 guys and only 18 guys, or something close to that. And we saw some of that in the start where he gave up the home run to Ty France in the 3rd time through the order. Yeah, if they score 15 runs a game, that will solve the problem of, Jake Odorizzi 3rd time through the order. But, he's someone who can make some contributions. He's not the worst starting pitcher. He has an ERA in the 4.5s now, thanks to the good start. Thanks to the quality start this weekend. But he's their 6th best starting pitcher, and they need to treat him more like their 6th best starting pitcher and less like the guy they signed in multi-year contract.
Do you see him making the playoff roster in some form of tandem start? I mean, especially with like Josh James, are we going to see him? Are those type of guys?
I think he's competing for a spot at the end of the bullpen with guys like Pedro Baez, with guys like whatever we're going to get from Josh James if and when he's able to come up in September. With the aforementioned Brooks Raley. So I think Raley has an advantage because he's, for as bad as his numbers are, he's good against left-handed pitchers, and they may want him for that role in October. And I think he would have an edge on Odorizzi in that case.
Yeah, if only we didn't have that stupid 3-batter minimum, you could actually use a left-handed specialist the way left-handed specialist is supposed to be used. Last question then.
Hey, Rob Manfred was really irritated about a trend that happened 20 years before in baseball. So,
Yeah,
and Tony La Russa is back. And Tony La Russa is back managing, so maybe he was actually ahead of the curve in that sense, not behind.
Maybe he was. Yeah, but it's the games feel so much shorter because of that too. By the way, wow, I just banged the microphone. So, a last question though. You didn't bring up Pedro Baez. His sort of some of the numbers are down. His velo is down, but he's been effective. What do you think we can expect to see from him?
So apparently Pedro Baez has gone to throwing only changeups. He's throwing a really high percentage of changeups, which seems to be his adjustment to the fact that his velocity is down and that he's not quite what he was for the last couple of years. Will that work? It does feel like a high wire act in some ways, particularly for a guy who hasn't pitched this way before. And I'm kind of of the opinion that anything we get from Pedro Baez, and he's been acceptable so far in the handful of innings he's pitched, is gravy, is a bonus. And in the end, there are, to me, 3 pitchers I want to see in the toughest situations: Ryan Presley, Kendall Graveman, and Christian Javier.
Okay. You did not mention Ryan Stanek.
I don't think he's as good as Christian Javier. Dusty Baker disagrees with me.
Well, I agree with you, Brian. As always, Brian Arbor on Go Astros. We will be back next week to hopefully, two more against the Royals, 3 against the Rangers. We're definitely going to be singing New York, New York when the A's take on the Yankees. Maybe we'll see, because it seems to me if we get up to a 5-game lead before September starts, that you start to feel pretty comfortable at that point.
Yeah, I mean, even with a 3.5 game lead, it's hard for the A's. And again, it's hard for the A's to come back from that. It's still possible, and it's only one team, but they need to go on a hot streak. But they're certainly capable of that. We've seen that. And certainly, if the Astros keep losing 1-run games, or like last night, have a blow up from the bullpen, it's not good. So again, be nice for them to win some games for many reasons.
It would be nice lots of wins for us. We'll see you next week, Brian. Thanks for jumping on.
Thank you, James.
So that does wrap up this episode of Go Astros. Again, guys, we've got about 30-something games left. This is a good baseball team that I think is going to find its stride. It's going to finish strong, and we know what this group of guys can do when it gets to the playoffs. So enjoy the last 30-something games. Enjoy the playoffs, and remember, Go Stros.